Well, hello, everybody, and welcome. Welcome to the latest in FlightGlobal sustainability webinars. This is the third one of the year, entitled Business Aviation, Rising to the Sustainability Challenge. My name is Mark Pilling, and I'm a contributing editor at FlightGlobal and your moderator today. We're partnering on all of our webinars this year with Pratt & Whitney, familiar to all of you in the industry as leading propulsion technologies players, and of course, their leading commitment to aviation sustainability. Now, we welcome questions from our audience, so please post them on the Q&A tab only, and my colleague Murdo Morrison will be monitoring them and filtering them as we go. We'll try and answer those at the end, maybe as we go along as well, so we'll keep our fingers crossed about that. So today's webinar will examine the progress being made and the challenges being faced by the business aviation community as it pursues environmental strategies to meet the sector's commitment to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. Now, we've timed this webinar to take place a few days before the industry's largest show, the 2023 MBAA Business Aviation Convention and Exhibition, taking place from 17th to 19th in Las Vegas. And sustainability will be a hot topic at the show, as you would expect. And we've got a set panel of 4 really top industry experts today to help us navigate this topic and talk about it. So I'm delighted to welcome today Kurt Edwards, the Director General of the International Business Aviation Council. I'm delighted to welcome Scott McElvain, Vice President, Business Development and Commercial Services at Pratt & Whitney Canada. Scott Cutzel, he's the Senior Vice President, Strategy and Sustainability for Clay Lacy Aviation. And last but not least, of course, love to welcome Eve Laurier, Vice President, Communications, Marketing and Public Affairs at Bombardier. We really do have a great lineup for you, and welcome everybody, and thank you for giving your time to FlightGlobal and obviously to the audience today. Thank you so much. Now, in the first 2 webinars of the year, we ran them more like a Dragon's Den or a Shark's Tank format, but I don't think today's is suitable for that because we've got it's a more traditional round table format, because we're not looking at specific technologies or specific innovations, which we did before. So let's kick off. So in this, for the first phase, I want us to address head on the increasing environmental pressure that the industry is facing. I wrote an article in the latest issue of Flight International. It's very good, by the way. See it on the website, highlighting the protests the industry has been facing at EBACE. Some of you saw them. But it's only one example of a wave of increasingly visible campaigns by activists demanding a ban on private jets. And it's spreading to become a global movement emanating from vociferous voices in Europe, but protests have taken place in the US, and they've taken place in Australia too. So I'm going to ask Kurt to sort of kick off as somebody with an industry voice. What is your reaction when you see protests like that, Kurt?
Well, thanks, Mark, for having me, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Well, when we see these protests, I think to myself, we welcome peaceful protests, we welcome rational dialogue, and I think this industry is more than prepared to talk to its critics about its environmental record and its environmental plans. However, when you see protests where they're breaking onto a field through airport perimeters, where they're potentially damaging aircraft, that's just unacceptable. And from my point of view, that truly is an act of or acts of unlawful interference with civil aviation, which is a term of art within the international civil aviation world, and governments should be doing more to dissuade against those types of activities. That said, putting those aside, we do need to have this dialogue, and this industry, whether we know it or not, throughout its history has been one of innovation, and has been one that has always strived to reduce its emissions, because economic interests and the environmental interests kind of came together. You want to burn less fuel no matter what. So we've got a history of innovation. We have a history of reducing our noise as well as our emissions. And believe it or not, we have a plan. And this industry has been perhaps somewhat timid at promoting itself with policymakers and with the wider public. It is a diverse industry with a wide range of missions. And I think when protesters look and consider our industry, they're thinking about just one subset of the broader community out there that operates these aircraft. So when you think about, the companies that exist in rural or underserved regions that are able to connect with government centers, with financial centers, that are able to work with their customers, their suppliers around the world, that's important. Are they thinking about the air ambulance missions that we provide? Are they thinking about the fact that we provide humanitarian lift in times of need? This is a very flexible, diverse industry that can do a number of things that the protesters kind of don't even know about, or if they do know about it, they're ignoring it. And then the plan that we have itself has been set up since 2009. We've been actively following it in terms of improving fuel efficiency on an annual basis, in terms of striving for carbon neutral growth from 2020. And we became even more ambitious in the last couple of years, having done more studies and figuring this out, that we can reach net carbon emissions by 2050, which is really important. And I think folks are not hearing enough about it. So in terms of what we as an industry have to do is think about how we communicate, particularly with policymakers. These are the folks that could put in place policies that will actually restrict our activity. And then the wider and kind of broader community of folks who know of us and perhaps want to learn about us. And in my exchanges with people at the International Civil Aviation Organization in Montreal, there's a real thirst for understanding better our industry's activities in this area. And we are now giving them more of that information. I tell them, be careful what you ask for, because we're going to tell you all about it. And this information is there for their use and for their policymaker use back in capitals, to actually stand up to these critics and be able to explain what the benefit of our industry is.
So let's just pick that apart, because there's two bits. Thank you, Kurt. I think you summarized it most eloquently. There's the messaging side, and then there's the sort of the risk of protest spreading and becoming more prevalent, and then that impact. I wondered if anybody wanted to talk about the risks to the industry. I mean, I don't just mean at shows and things, but I mean as you pointed out there, Kurt, at airports and things, and at stations, the risks of protest spreading. Does anybody want to come on, talk just a bit more about that? The fear of it, perhaps, and what it might generate. Anybody want to jump in? I think you're going to have to jump in just there, Kurt. Do you see it spreading?
There is a risk that it could spread, that's for sure. So it's strongest, as you said, in Europe. There have been some protests in North America, and I guess a few in Australia. But what I find fascinating is that when I'm working with my member associations around the world, in most other regions, this is not an issue. They look at business aviation as a lifeline to remote and underserved regions. The populations are, while they're interested in sustainable development, they view aviation as part of that. So it's less of a concern beyond that. That said, given the vocal minority that you see in Europe, this very small group or groups around the continent protesting like that gets attention, that draws the media, right? And so it also is something that politicians care about. So there is a risk there that if we don't do anything to work with the politicians and to counter those messages that the protesters are putting out there, which are ill-informed, incorrectly based, we are ourselves helping to drive that risk. I know that in North America, we're seeing a little bit less of it, but it's still a possibility that it could spread over here absent an active industry in this regard.
Thank you, Kurt. Ev, would you like to make an observation, please, here?
Well, I couldn't agree more with Kurt. So it will intensify. So before I talk about spread, it will intensify because activists, whether it's in our industry or other industries, are really well organized and set up. And the more media coverage they get, the more funding they get. So it's a whole way, right, of organizing and of getting funds for a broader group. So this won't go away in Europe. It started and it's picking up steam. Will it spread to other countries? Absolutely. And I agree with Kurt. I mean, in the countries where they understand the need for flexibility and agility of corporate jets, it's less worrisome. In the countries where they understand the economic impact of having an OEM or, you know, anybody else in the ecosystem of private aviation, it will be less of an impact. But right now we have a perfect storm in certain places like Europe, right? So and Kurt always says, Ev, when you talk about the economic impact of private or business aviation in Europe or in US, it doesn't, nobody's listening to that. They're not listening to that, right? Like, so that doesn't have any weight. And then in those countries, there's a profound, I will say, hatred for a group that is the very, very ultra high net worth individuals that these groups use as the poster child for industry. And we have no problems with ultra high net worth individuals. There are clients and we know how they use their aircraft, but there's also huge corporations and there's also ambulances and but never do activists talk about the other groups. They just want to, so that's never going to go away. So I think we're starting, I've only been in this industry for 3 years, but somebody said at the beginning, like, it's taking on a lot of space at the shows, and that's a very good sign. And it's part of the agenda every single time we talk about business aviation. And just 3 years ago, when I started in this, it wasn't that strong or primary in the messaging. Now it's everywhere. So I think we're doing the right thing and having more talks in those countries that are not listening to us. But to think it's not going to intensify, it will intensify. Will it spread? It will spread. So again, and Kurt and I have lots of conversation about that, but it's how, as a group, we coordinate to make sure that the messaging is well coordinated and spread by all of us together to all of the stakeholders, and not us trying to do our own little things. So there's more people willing to listen to what we have to say than people not willing to dialogue. And right now what's happening is everybody's focusing on the people that are not willing to dialogue, because that's great for media clips. So we need to do a better job with everybody else.
Right. And how do you rate that job, Ev, so far, or anybody else? Or Scott McKelvin, do you want to jump in and make a point? I see you've come off mute, Scott.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to build on what both Ev and Kurt were saying very eloquently. You know, I think the potential impacts that we have to be very alert to and worried about here is, as the vocal protest potentially grows, you know, that can have an impact on operations for the many operators in that diverse fleet. And okay, putting aside the highly identifiable population that you talked about, there is an awful lot of diversity there. And, you know, we wouldn't want those missions to be negatively impacted. And ultimately, from a manufacturing viewpoint, it doesn't change, the dialogue doesn't change what we know to be the necessity to do in the course that we've set for ourselves as an industry, which Kurt laid out. You know, we're going to continue to go drive to all the actions that we have to in order to hit carbon neutrality by 2050. So it does become, unfortunately, a distraction, which is potentially harmful to the mission of some of our fleet, and doesn't help us advance our course of technology. So having that dialogue, as both Kurt and Ev said, is so very, 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 very important.
Well, what we might do at the end of the webinar, when we talk about, we're going to take a little bit of a look about what to look out for at NBAA on sustainability next week. We can perhaps talk about some of this messaging and some of the things that are going to be brought up there. Scott Cutsall, I notice you want to make a point, sir.
I think, I agree with what Evan, Scott, and everyone's saying, and just again to build on one more aspect of it. In addition to the diversity, in addition to the use, every plane you see flying, that's at least 20 to 25 direct jobs, and probably 200 to 300 indirect jobs. And I don't think that's part of the messaging that's being discussed either, right? This employs hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people around the world. This is an industry. And I agree with what Ev said. As an industry, we need to continue to coordinate our message. But as individual operators and businesses around the world that are listening to this, we each need to do our part in our local communities, with our local politicians, with our local airport officials. We need to come alongside those airport officials and provide that education to our local politicians so that they're hearing balanced information on both sides of this topic. They hear everyone has a right to protest and make their voice heard. That's wonderful, but they also need to hear the truth of what the industry is doing, the number of people this industry is employing, and the progress this industry is making in operating more sustainably.
No, thank you, Scott, for that input. Great. Obviously, the protest side, we've talked a bit about that. Let's just talk about another topic where the industry is under pressure. Again, Europe is in the vanguard here, but I don't think necessarily it's going to be confined to Europe. Is the prospect of being threatened with exclusion from airports on grounds related to the environment, perhaps noise as well. Amsterdam Schiphol is mentioned, but there's been other suggestions, Brussels, I believe, even from Berlin and other places. My question is, how worrying is the prospect of being excluded from airports, on these grounds for business aviation in particular, because it sometimes feels like a bit of an easy target, and could it become a trend? Who wants to? Scott, do you want to start us off, and then maybe Scott Cutsall, and then we'll see whatever. But who else wants to jump in here?
I think you meant Scott with Pratt, but I can start. I have a North American view coming from North America, but I mean, these are publicly funded airports, and the public has a right to use the airports, irregardless of the type of airplane they're using. They have a right to use the airport. They're part of the public. So while it is very concerning that we are starting to segment our society and give access based on whatever metric feels appropriate on that day, that is very concerning. But again, we kind of loop back to our first topic, is we need to provide that education of what the industry is doing, the progress the industry has made. I'm sure Scott with Pratt can talk about what it was like 20 years ago versus what it's like today, and from an aerodynamic standpoint, from an efficiency standpoint, the progress that's being made is dynamic. And then with the prospect with sustainable aviation fuel here today, production going to be expanding rapidly in the coming years. It's going to continue to reduce from an environmental impact standpoint. So it is concerning, but hopefully we will turn the tide and get things moving in the right direction.
Scott McElvain, thank you.
Yeah, again, just to build on what Scott was saying, I think one of the things that I think about when I hear of the protests and potential closures of access to specific airports, I think about our operators and our operating base. And, one of the opportunities that we all have is on flight operations and efficient flight operations. And so closure of some of these airports or lack of accessibility, all it's going to create is operations around that base, which might be less optimized, and therefore it runs counterintuitive to the fundamental objective of reducing emissions. And so from that viewpoint, I'm not sure that it's very helpful. It is a concerning trend. And again, I think about it from our customers' viewpoint and what it potentially does to them, as well as their particular mission that they're trying to serve.
So thank you, Scott. Appreciate that. So Kurt, I know you're going to come in, but I'm going to make this point to you. In your answer, you can answer this as well, is the business aviation actually fundamentally relatively weak in its lobbying efforts, in its power to get its message across, compared to, say, other sectors, Kurt? In addition to what your point, please.
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say, no, it's not weak. I would say we've had some successes. We always have to be vigilant. And to Scott's point about US airports being public, it's fascinating to see how each state, meaning country, approaches airport operations and ownership. The United States has a really interesting and extensive program of federal grants that requires that airports serve everyone, right? And that has been extremely important to efforts in the United States to keep airports open, to maintain access for all users. And that has been a good thing there. And I know that NBAA is quite active in the US on that particular point. In Europe, it's a little bit more challenging. There have, however, been victories. Le Bourget remains open. Le Bourget was almost closed when CDG was put in place. And it was because of business aviation leading that charge back in the early 70s to keep Le Bourget open and allow for that continued access, and look at the success it is today. So I don't think there would be any disputes about the importance of these airports and our activity at them, especially when we as an industry are engaged. I know that EBAA, the European Business Aviation Association, is quite engaged with Amsterdam right now. Things obviously are quite challenging there, but they're doing their level best to persuade the policymakers of the industry's benefits. And going to Scott's point, if business aviation cannot operate there or has a significantly reduced level of activity there, they will go somewhere else. So it's kind of, we need to work with the policymakers. I think it's happening. And yet in other countries, when airports develop, the surrounding towns are ecstatic to have that economic activity. So how do we bring that information to the policymakers? And I think that's what our associations are doing.
No, thank you, Kurt. Appreciate your input there. So these aren't issues that are going to go away. They're going to probably proliferate, intensify. A great word that Ev used earlier. I like the way that you phrased that, intensify. Let's move on to. I'm sure they'll probably talk about though as next year's webinars, whatever. But one of the things that I'm very conscious of, and as I wrote my feature and talking with people, is about how it's important to be on the front foot, to be ahead of the game in the industry and on sustainability. And I wanted to ask Scott here, as an operator, with Clay Lacey, significant operator with a plan here. And you're also one of the few executives in the operational side who've got sustainability in their title, which is hats off to you there. But just tell me about, why did your company, and you in particular, to start taking sustainability as a topic seriously? And well, let's talk about that one first. Then we can talk about what a strong strategy looks like. Would you mind updating us, please?
Absolutely. So I get asked this question a lot, and I'm a fan of Simon Sinek, and it comes back to your why. Why are you going to do something? And for us, I can personalize it. Number one, we're in business. We felt it would provide a competitive advantage to us, and we're starting to see that. In the United States, the Securities and Exchange Commission in 2024 is now requiring public companies to disclose their carbon footprints. And we're providing solutions to reduce those carbon footprints to our aircraft owners and to our charter clients. So number one, competitive advantage. Number two, we believed there would be future regulation. We don't want regulation, but we felt it was coming. And in order to be ready for the future, we needed to start taking action. And the final thing, and it sounds pretty simple, but we think it's the right thing to do. If we can start to change how we're operating today to reduce our environmental impact, to increase our engagement with local communities, and to make us a stronger company, why wouldn't we want to start to take those actions? And so it's just a conscious choice to say it's the right thing to do. And that was our why. And then it kind of led to our what. I say the why leads to what are you going to do? Now that you know why you're doing it, what are you going to do? And for us, we really embrace the triple bottom line concept of social, environmental, and economic. I say to people all the time, and this kind of, not to go backward in our conversation with what the protesters are doing, but it's a focus on environmental without a focus on anything else. And you really need to take a more holistic view to sustainability. I can be a very sustainable company from an environmental standpoint, and I can run myself into the ground economically, and won't be here to be an environmentally friendly company. So you need to balance those three aspects of sustainability in order to be effective.
Okay, now that's great. You've just
Might have
frozen on
lost
us,
you.
Scott, there a bit, so I think you're back a bit back. But we got all your message, so thank you very much. Ev,
Okay.
did you want to? Yeah, thank you. Yes, you're back. You're back visually as well. Ev, did you want to make a point too, please?
Well, any time that I hear Simon Sinek name being mentioned, I have to jump in, because one day we have to get him to come to our industry association, NBAA, because
Yes.
he is incredible. And it's true, it's the why. And when I think about how at Bombardier, like, we get people to get really excited about something, anytime we mention innovation around sustainability, it is the engagement that gets people going. I don't know one employee, we're 17,000 here, that if you say, do you want to come and work on a piece of a project that's going to make either the supply chain, the production, the running of the facility in a more sustainable way, would you like to be part of that think tank? People are going to be jumping up and down, because forget activists for a minute, we're all living on this planet. We all have the same why, because it's the right thing to do, because we live here. So we don't need to be convinced that pushing as much as we can for what we can do with regulation, sustainability in our everyday action is the right thing to do. We all know it. So I don't have to walk on the shop floor and try to convince people. I just have to say, we have a project, and it's to try to make the production of the airplane more sustainable. Everybody's going to pitch in. We, in French, we say interpeller. So the only word I have for that is where we feel pulled into that mission, because it's all of our whys, right? So it's because it's the right thing to do, but it's because it feels good to be part of that change as well. And what I particularly like about this industry is how agile we are and how fast we can make decisions, try things, and get it moving. So last year, at one point, we were having a discussion with our CEO and the executive committee saying, what if we put sustainable aviation fuel in all of our test flights? And I may be mistaken, I think we test, so here in Montreal, we do the tests, right? So I think we probably do 15,000 flights where we just fly around, right? 6 months later, we were announcing it to the world that as of today, every single flight test that we're doing based out of Montreal is fueled with SAF. And if we don't have enough SAF, we'll book and claim, or we'll offset it some other way. It was a point on the agenda to discuss. And then 6 months later, it was a done deal, which is a huge saving in our carbon footprint, right? So I think that the OEMs and everybody, again, in the ecosystem, we're quite fast and agile as an industry to test and implement things and try things. So it gives me great hope. I'm an optimist, right? But I know we're trending in the right direction. I know we're all engaged with it. And I think for me and for Bombardier and the people I've spoken to, our why is because we get it. We get that we're on this planet and we want to decrease the emission, but we want to continue have a huge economic impact, because they are great jobs and we need great jobs for the economy. So yeah, for me, the why is the same as you, Scott, but it's also just because we get it. It's the right thing to do, and it feels good, and it's our employees are fully engaged on this.
That's great input, Ed. Thank you very much. Scott, you follow up, and then I'll ask Kurt, because he wants to make a point as well. Scott, did you want to come back on with your thought there?
I just had one other element, because a lot of people have said to me over the past couple of years, oh, this is a political issue, and depending on who's in power around the world, it's going to ebb and flow. And my answer to them is, you need to take your political hat off. This is not a political issue. This is not something that's going away. And no matter where you are on the political spectrum, this is about operating efficiently. And as an industry, I don't know another industry that appreciates efficiency more than this industry. So let's operate more efficiently. Let's take the target off of us and start sharing the things that we're doing. And as I say to everybody, you don't need to do everything. If everybody in this industry starts making incremental steps toward operating more sustainably, the collective impact will be enormous, and it will move this industry forward. And hopefully it will avoid regulation, because I don't know about anyone else, I do not like it. I don't like being told what to do. So I'm taking proactive steps to reduce our environmental impact, to operate more efficiently from a business perspective, to drive revenues so that we can avoid regulation.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. Well said. Kurt, what did you want to come in with?
Just two things. First, to build off Ev's point about everyone being so energized by the mission, by sustainability. It is also a generational matter. And the younger folks coming into our industry are really interested in making sure that what we are doing is the right thing with regard to the environment. And they're excited about the steps that companies, that OEMs, operators are taking, and they're proud of that. And I would commend to you all a video done by the Air Transport Action Group back in 2022 for the ICAO Assembly, which has, I want to say, 20 to 30 young aviation professionals from around the world speaking about this. Their general aviation, business aviation, commercial air transport, OEMs, really interesting, and also quite, it helps to bring you some optimism. And then to Scott's point in your question about what do operators need to do, or how they get ahead of this, let me give you an example, Mark, that's right there in your own backyard. The Coldplay factor, right? Coldplay stopped touring because they were concerned about their emissions, right? But when they found out that there's sustainable aviation fuel, that they're high quality offsets, guess what? They're touring again, and they're making it a point to buy SAF, whether the molecules themselves or via book and claim. They're doing high quality offsets to offset the emissions of the remaining emissions of their touring. And it helped them kind of figure out a way forward so they could do what they continue to do, meet up with their fans who like what they do, but also do the right thing for the environment. So there are things that operators can do in this space.
Thank you, Kurt. I appreciate that, and it's always nice to bring a rock band into the conversation. We can always vibe with that. Let's move. We've touched on it a bit, and I don't want to spend too long on it because obviously we've got some other topics to talk about. But we talk about the tools to decarbonize. We've already mentioned SAF. We've mentioned offsetting. We've mentioned book and claim. I just wanted if one or two of you could just summarize. I know there's been quite a lot of offsetting in the industry. SAF has been used quite a lot by business aviation, perhaps larger amounts in proportion to its size than any other part of the industry. Are we doing enough on those efforts generally? What's our sort of assessment as to the pace that we're operating at? Can somebody does anybody want to give a go at that, to sort of just almost summarize, if you like, the sort of tools that we're using to decarbonize in business aviation? I suppose my question is, are we doing enough? What's next? Scott, thanks, Scott from Pratt & Whitney.
Sure. I mean, there's always more that we can do, and so I'll kind of like run the ladder of things here. Today's engines that are currently on the marketplace, including products such as our PW800, are double-digit improvements across the board. And so the extent to which the industry adopts these new kinds of products with more efficient engines, like that's a here and now thing that it's a here and now problem, but there's a here and now solution with some of the products, the latest in products that are out there. from a SAF viewpoint, you know, all of our engines, and I believe some of our competitors are the same today, are capable of using up to 50% blends of SAF. And so every flight that doesn't take advantage of that is a missed opportunity. Now, there is an issue of supply, and there is an issue of not just availability of the fuel, but also the distribution and the management worldwide. And that's an area where, as an industry, we need to come together faster in order to encourage further adoption of SAF. And great example of Coldplay and the fact that they're making use of SAF and as well for Bombardier's flight test. You know, but there's an awful lot more that can be done in that domain. And then you layer on top of that, Mark, okay, there are other programs like book and claim and offsets, and those are not being maximized as opportunities. And the initiatives that come out of such things as offsets and the supporting organizations with all their initiatives underneath that support the offset programs to go encourage those kinds of programs to grow and thrive and to take on more of the projects that they're doing worldwide that have not just missions based around improving the environment, but also missions based around improving social economic conditions for regions around the world too. You know, there's an awful lot more that we can do, but I would say it does take the industry to come together in ways that we're talking about, that we're encouraging, but more yet needs to be done, and including the engagement with international regulatory bodies and governments and all the surrounding ecosystem that we work with.
No, thanks, Scott. Appreciate that. And Kurt, I'm going to ask you just to jump in here, just to give us a brief you know, one of the things we talk about, you talked about ICAO, we've mentioned SAF and the availability, offsets, yes, but book and claim as a tool, being able to acquire SAF from somewhere else, but also book it against your own environmental requirements. Where is that at in terms of the sort of the ability to deliver global standards for book and claim, so it can be people can be truly confident in its global and in, you know, use?
Right. So I mean, ICAO recognizes that sustainable aviation fuel is going to be, perhaps among all the different levers that we have, it's going to be the most important in terms of getting us to net zero carbon emissions by 2050. And from that comes the question, how do we accelerate the production? How do we get more of it? What do we, as a UN specialized agency focused on civil aviation, what can we do to help move that along? We have been talking to ICAO since last year about the concept of book and claim. It's already out there, it's being used, but it's not being used in a standardized way necessarily. And there's a lot of question about, you know, the validity of the environmental attributes that you're receiving when you purchase fuel via book and claim. The council is of ICAO, the permanent body that kind of runs it for the 3 years in between the assembly, is extremely interested in the concept, but they have concerns, not unreasonable. We are working with them to help explain it. We're bringing in technical folks to help provide the information to make them comfortable with the concept. From our point of view, this is a tool that will be critical for the business aviation community around the world to use to participate in the SAF economy. So if you're somewhere where SAF is not available in molecule form, and that's in most places around the world, you can purchase SAF via book and claim, be certain that it will be produced and uploaded somewhere else, but you will receive documentation that you get the credit for that purchase and you get the accompanying environmental attributes that go with it. That's an important incentive for an operator. It sends an important demand signal to producers, and it will also help for the development of SAF around the world, which ultimately, from a sustainability point of view, and Scott mentioned this before, you really need SAF to be produced near airports. You can't be trucking it across continents or shipping it across seas. From a sustainability point of view, you really need it to be produced near an airport. So the more SAF production spaces, the better. There's a huge conference coming up in Dubai at the end of November called the Conference on Alternative Aviation Fuels, sponsored by ICAO. It's meant to find a way forward on recommendations for what we as a global industry and what especially the governments of the world need to be doing to put in place incentivization policies, and putting in place mechanisms for assistance to help match up investors and those states that are interested in producing SAF. We are there to remind them of the importance of book and claim. From our point of view, guidance from ICAO on book and claim for states' use would be very helpful, because based on that guidance, states will know what to look for in book and claim systems, such that they will then allow their operators to buy SAF via book and claim and get the environmental attributes. That's a huge incentive for our group, our community, going forward.
And does that, thank you, Kurt. Thank you for that. We look forward to those further updates from CAF, from that ICAO meeting. Scott Cutzel, does that, are you booking and claiming? How does that fit into your strategy on sustainability?
We are not booking and claiming, and to follow on with what Kurt said, the primary reason is that there's not a global standard today, and the work that Kurt and the committee is doing is important. I know COSAFA is working on it. 4Air is working on a standardized system that they've announced. There needs to be confidence in the book and claim system that someone else is not also claiming that environmental attribute, so that it's being double claimed. And once that confidence exists and that standard is established, which I think we're getting very close, I agree, book and claim is the solution until all those production centers come online around the world close to airports, because the carbon reduction is in the manufacturing and the distribution. And so you need to limit the distance of distribution in order to maximize the environmental benefit. There's also being work done on a standardized receipt. So when an operator buys SAF, what are they receiving, so that they can give that to their sustainability department to know all the elements to properly calculate the carbon reduction. NATA and 4Air have done a lot of work around this on a fuel delivery receipt. I don't know what the term is in other parts of the world. In the US, we have standardized tax documents called a W-4, and there's a box one, everybody puts the same thing in box one, wages. We need to have a standardized document for operators that they receive, whether they're in Africa or Asia or Europe or the US, that when you buy 5,000 gallons of sustainable aviation fuel, you receive a document with all the appropriate information to know what the product that you're getting and how to properly claim that in your environmental reduction. That standardization is very important to build confidence in the system. And I think we're getting very close, which is exciting.
Thank you, Scott. Great to hear. Ev, did you want to jump in with a point as well, please?
Yeah, so I think I agree with my colleagues here. Book and claim is the solution B, right? So being based in Quebec, I'm now sitting at the airport. So Bombardier, we make the airplanes here, we test the airplanes here, and we're at the airport in Quebec, where we have hydroelectricity. So where we could actually probably produce the cleanest SAF on the planet. And right now, the government has to decide where to put its energy, but our clean energy as well, to supply who. So the industry voice has to be a lot stronger. So for us at Bombardier, we have to book and claim, because to get the SAF right now, we have to get it from what I've gathered so far, California, which is completely at the other end, not of our country, but same at the other end, or in Scandinavia, I think, which is really far from Quebec as well. So if you want to do, and you could do SAF and say it's greenwashing, right? We use SAF and transport it from the other end of the world, but that really that's not the objective. So for us, like, we're book and claiming when we can't have SAF here, and we're using a partner that we've had for a long time. It's audited, so it's signature. So we're very confident that the book and claim system we're using is good and, you know, credible. But I totally agree with Scott. Like, there has to be so much more done, and hopefully soon. And I'm talking about my own government here in Quebec is going to go, wait a minute, we have all the assets necessary to make the SAF, and we can make the SAF in a very environmental way using hydroelectricity, and actually put it at the airport, where on top of having huge airliners and huge international traffic, there's an OEM, 4 OEMs in the world, and one is here. So when you were asking Kurt about the voice of the industry and the lobbying, I think the voice of our industry is lobbying really well. But now I think, like, from an OEM, I'm starting to think maybe we need to lobby our own government, you know, not for anything else than, hey, like, we'll buy, we have demand, we'll buy it. You have a customer, please build it. So
yes,
that,
no, well said. No, well said, Ev. And that's a great observation about brought in so many aspects of the challenge around energy, this energy transition, and how the industry is looking at it. Let's change tack a little bit. We've talked about SAF, we talked about offsets, book and claim, great. Technology is going to be a huge element of achieving a decarbonized an industry that can do this. Scott, you know, obviously we haven't got that much time, but I mean, you know, Pratt & Whitney is working on your power plant solutions. Just give us a snapshot of where we are, and then I'll ask Ev to give us a snapshot on where Bombardier is too, please.
Sure, no problem. So, you know, we have a history of improving fuel efficiency by 1 to 2% year over year with the technologies. You know, like I already said, the latest generation of products, it's double digit, you know, 15% improvement, which is, in the world of turbine type technologies, you know, 60 years of producing these kinds of technologies, we're really at the fine point of high technology. So getting 15% is a fantastic improvement. So there's an awful lot more that's going into advanced thermal technologies in order to go see what that next generation can look like, and that next generation being not that far out. But then you also have to put on top of that SAF. Okay, we've talked an awful lot about SAF, but that's 50% blends. You know, the next step for the industry is 100% SAF. And, you know, and that's what these CAFs and these forums are about. And there's 2 different paths there. There's drop-in SAF, but then you can also do what's called boutique or non-drop-in SAF, which are specifically designed specs optimized for emissions in the engines in which they burn. And the industry's really got to come together there to set that standard. And then, as Ev talked about, and as I mentioned before, we got to go push the ecosystem to go produce that. Beyond that, yeah, okay, there's other technologies, new technologies. So, you know, we've got a hybrid electric project, which we've announced, which is aiming for a 30% production or 30% reduction. And that is helping us develop the technology bricks and understand how do you bring more electric into the environment of business aviation as well as others. And then last but not least, there's items such as alternative fuels. You know, an awful lot of talk beyond SAF about fuels like hydrogen, you know, and I would say that thermal engines, they're somewhat fuel agnostic. So, you know, you can burn hydrogen today. And the issue is really about how do we work with the likes of companies like Bombardier and others in order to find ways to make that fuel work in a platform which is efficient. And from an engine viewpoint, how does that fuel actually get injected and combusted in the engine itself? But engines today can burn hydrogen. So this is really about how do you get it in a platform in a way which works given the application that the customer is trying to achieve.
No, thank you, Scott, for that. That's great. And is, you know, I think for you guys in the aerospace engineering, this is a sweet spot. This is a great time. You're getting investment. You know, you're getting R&D money to get this, you know, to give us the solutions. And hats off to you. We love reporting about it. Ev, you know, Scott will chip in as well. But you know, Bombardier is putting your money where your mouth is too in this area. What are you doing?
So I like what you just said there. putting our money where our mouth is, because you just talked about R&D money. So my government's not listening to this call right now, but if they were, I'd be very happy to say we are spending our own money. We're spending 90% of our R&D money on a big project, and it's been undergoing for 15 years now. So this is not like Bombardier waking up and thinking, oh, we have to look really good because people are talking sustainability. 15 years ago, this project started, and it's called the EcoJet. So I'm not going to give you too much about it, because the engineers at Bombardier are going to go, what is she talking about? Because I'm not an engineer. I can tell you it's about blended wing, okay? I can tell you it's about the aerodynamics and how using a blended wing body, we're seeing a decrease in emission by 25%. And at NBAA, we're actually going to make a big, I don't want to say it's an announcement, but we're going to show visually what happened last week. So when we started this project 15 years ago with a ton of engineers and sustainability experts and drone experts that we brought in from everywhere on the planet, that one of the person I speak to, I think, is from Pakistan. And he said, I came to Quebec in the middle of the winter to work on this project 15 years ago. It was a 7-foot wingspan drone. And we actually made it fly, and we're testing technologies on this drone, that's this technological platform. And next week, you're going to see where we're at. So I'm not going to say more about that, but at NBAA, stay tuned, because it's really impressive. And it's not something, it exists, and it's happening, and we have a team there. So that's the EcoJet. The other thing that I think is about the now that's really, really impressive is AI. We have a super smart woman here. Her name is Elsa Brunel Young, if you want to follow her on LinkedIn. She just did a podcast about this, but it's predictive maintenance of the aircrafts, right? So it's connecting all of our aircrafts together and using data and AI to help decrease, obviously, the emission through many different ways. So either predictive maintenance, or another is suggesting the alternative routes. Which route should you take to use less fuel? Can you tell I'm French right now when I'm trying to speak fast? But you see what I'm saying. So there's the technology of now, that we're testing technologies now for the future. That's the EcoJet. But there's also all the data and all the investment we made in AI, and make sure that our aircrafts are connected, and we're using that data to make sure that we're flying as sustainably as possible. So, and there's dedicated teams. So I think sometimes, you know, when it's sustainable technology, there's tiger teams. For us, it's not tiger teams. It's our own money, different plans, people working remotely, trying stuff on drones that are really exciting. That you're going to hear all about NBAA. And it's our own money, so our own R&D money.
Very good. Well, okay, and I'm sure that if the government is listening and they did want to chip in, then I'm sure you'd be very happy to receive that under the right conditions. Yeah. Scott, did you want to chip in with a thought here too, listening to this?
I hope that people listening to this are, I mean, how can you not hear the excitement here? But I believe we're on a revolution in aviation. When you talk about SAF, AI, the blended winglet technologies, advancement in engine technologies, there's renewable diesel out there for ground operations, electric, hydrogen flight. I mean, we are truly in an age of revolution in this industry. And how can you not be excited about what's to come? And to steal a great quote that my friend Stuart DeLeon with NBAA always says, don't let good be the enemy of great. Who knows what the ultimate solution is, but the industry is obviously pursuing multiple solutions to this problem, and we're going to figure it out because we are an industry of innovation. And so it's just, I find it's just, in my 24 years in aviation, this is the most exciting time to be in aviation with all of these developments and innovations that are coming. And I'm excited to see the impact that it's going to have in the future.
No, well, that's a great point, Scott. Thank you very much. Well, we are getting towards the end we're getting towards the top of the hour. We've answered quite a few questions as we've gone along. Ev mentioned it there. Gave us a little sneak preview about the sort of great things that Bombardier is going to be doing next week at NBAA. But let's just talk about some of the messaging and even the initiatives to be seen on sustainability at the show. What do we hope to see? What do we expect to see? Because I think you're all going. So who wants to sort of kick off? Kurt, do you want to sort of give us and this will be your closing comment probably, because we're just getting to the top of the hour.
Gotcha. Right. So I think two important themes of the show will be sustainability and innovation, and we've touched on both of those today. It is an exciting time, to use Scott's word. Compared to when I started in this industry 10 years ago, we have come so far in terms of the attention to this specific area. And I think that you will see the manifestation of that at NBAA, and that will include the reveal of a brand new wide-ranging communications strategy, messaging on these particular points we've been talking about today. So I'm looking forward to seeing that, learning more about it, and then with our member associations around the world, figuring out how we can draw from it and use it globally, because it is going to be so important to our future.
Great, that's great, Kurt. And Murdo has also got his ears. Murdo, who's on the call too from FlightGlobal, we will be monitoring that because we'll be reporting it in Flight Daily News during the show. That will fill up some column inches there. Who else wants to who wants to go next? Don't be shy. Shall I pick on somebody? Ev, what are you? Scott's talked himself off mute. Just give us 30 seconds on what you're looking forward to, Scott.
Sure. So, come see us at our booth. You'll see the latest generation of technologies, and you can talk to our experts, our team that'll be there. That'll explain to you about what it takes to go and deliver these improvements, that can talk to you about SAF and how do you use SAF, can talk to you about how to optimize the use of your engines in coordination with the aircraft, as Ev was talking about. And last but not least, okay, it's plan B, but there are carbon offset programs, and we have one too, and there will be people there that can help explain how that program works and how do you get on board. Definitely a very exciting time. Thank you for saying that, Scott. I think you hit the nail right on the head.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Ev, do you want to? You gave us a little bit of a sneak preview, but it's an important show for Bombardier. You always done a lot of sustainability. I remember you did the whole booth one time was a lot. I think the time before last, maybe it was eBay, was covered in sustainable, recyclable material. What are you up to? You told us a bit about EcoJet, but no doubt you've got more too.
Yeah, but your question, we have so much, and so we have a full report on sustainability. But I think what's most important to me for these shows is that we pull together as an industry. This is a highly competitive industry. From one OEM to another, we are very competitive. But when it comes to sustainability, I will always want to sit with the other OEMs and pull our voices together, pull the data together, speak as an industry. We did it, I remember, at eBase, where the 4 CEOs of the OEM, or 5 CEOs, were sitting on a panel. We need to keep on doing that more often. Bombardier is super open to that. We're a small industry in a big world with a lot of pushback on our voice. So from a communication strategy, we have to get our facts in order. We have to talk the same messaging, Kurt, as you said, and we all have to be at the table collaborating and not forgetting the competition for that. I think is really, really important, but I know we're doing it. We're getting there. So I'm also, again, I'm an eternal optimist. It must be the Quebec air making me such an optimist, but I am.
Well, we applaud you for that, Ev. Thank you very much. We love your energy. Well, the energy of everybody's been great. Scott Cutzel, the last word to you, sir, as an operator. I liked your point about being ahead of the game, etc. But what's your sort of last point, sir?
My final point, and thank you for that, is actually a call to action. If you're attending base, seek out one solution that you can take home and start to implement in your business, in your department. I go back to, if everybody starts making incremental changes, the collective impact will be very large. There's going to be a lot of resources available. There's a lot of people to talk to. If you're curious about implementing sustainable strategies in your business, reach out to your industry organizations. They all have environmental committees, And those people on those committees are very excited about this. They're very willing to help and to share best practices in pursuing a more sustainable operation. So be curious, ask questions, and don't be defeated that you can't do everything. Be excited about what you can do. And by the time you accomplish that, there will be another thing you can do, and it just builds and builds and builds.
Very good. So a call to action for all of us, not just at base, but perhaps in our personal lives, but in our businesses as well. Thank you so much for that, Scott. And I trust that everybody has got a better understanding about business aviation's response and strategies now to solving the challenges around sustainability. And thank you, everybody, Scott, and Kurt and Ev. Thank you so much for your contributions, showing your commitment, your passion for this. Thank you to our sponsor, Pratt & Whitney. To the audience, we've answered, I think, most of the questions as they've come up. This webinar will be available on demand afterwards at your leisure. And our fourth and final sustainability webinar of the year will be on the 7th of December. So look out for details of that in the next, couple of months. Finally, just a little plug for another event that FlightGlobal is involved with. This is the Airlines 2023 conference taking place in London on the 20th of November in partnership with Airlines UK, with Bar UK, IATA, with FlightGlobal, exploring the UK's dynamic aviation market and industry and where that is headed. Some great speakers: Tim Clark of Emirates, Sean Doyle, BA, Maria Owens-Thompson of IATA, Alan Newby of Rolls-Royce is going to be there, and Stuart Wingate, the CEO of Gatwick, are among the headline speakers. And that's going to be a great event. There's the website there. Get your early bird tickets. I think they're still available. It leaves me to say thank you to everybody again. We're 2 minutes past the hour. I do apologize if we've eaten a little bit into your day, but I trust this has been a valuable discussion about business aviation rising to the sustainability challenge. More to come on it, but I wish you all, from me, Mark Killing, a good day, from FlightGlobal as well. Goodbye until next time. Thank you very much for attending.